Welcome to episode 67 of the Half Point Per Podcast. I'm your host, Evan Riggs, joined as always by my co-host, Dalton Willie, and producer, Johnny Pham. I don't know if you guys noticed, if you're on the YouTube, that countdown was like a lot slower sounding than usual. Was that just me?
I was going to ask what was going on there.
It was a little slow to punch, almost like Johnny making it to the show, a solid 20 minutes late today.
I was not 20 minutes late. I was late. Took a nap. Hands up. I took a nap. I apologize for absolutely nothing.
But you know how accurate Find Friends is? This is a little creepy, by the way. I knew you were about ready to be on because we were Dalton's like, all right, I'm going to check and make sure he's even home. So we did, and you were home. I was like, all right, let me check. I look, and I was kind of looking. I was like, oh, it looks like Johnny's like on his porch. I was like, oh, no, wait, he literally just walked into his office. And then like a minute later, there you were. Like I could literally see where you were in your house. And now that I've been there, I know where your things are.
And that's great. But I was asleep the whole time. I don't know how to explain this. Besides, I woke up in a frantic. I was like, oh, boy. I definitely slept past through the alarm.
Yes.
Because, I apologize for nothing.
It's all good. It's all good. I appreciate the non-apology. Through the slow countdown, through Johnny being late, we are here. And we are here, Dalton, to talk a little bit of NFL draft. We're not going to pretend to be like draft experts, but we consume our fair amount of content, I'd say, on the subject. And most people, when they're covering the draft hardcore, they're covering it from a NFL draft perspective. And there are a lot of people that do dynasty perspective and talk about a lot of the guys. What we're going to do here today is focus on a very select few. We've got top 5 running backs and top 5 receivers. Not our rankings, to be clear. These are from Establish the Run. So being a little bit coy here intentionally, we still have a rookie draft in our league that's coming up. Don't want to give away our ranks necessarily and how we feel about certain guys in comparison to others. But we will at least talk about these 5 guys at each position, and that will give away at least a little bit how we feel and, of course, give you guys some information on those prospects. Dalton, anything to add before we jump right in here?
No, I'm incredibly excited. Like you said, we've been doing a lot of research when it comes to the NFL draft. One thing I've realized, because this is probably the first year I've really dug into it before landing spots, is that I don't think there's a consensus across the board, at least with this draft, on most players except for like 2 or 3, which is incredibly frustrating when you're trying to catch on.
Well, and especially at running back, I actually have probably, this is around my usual time of starting the podcast cycle and reading cycle of specific people. And this is the biggest difference of opinion I've ever seen at running back once you get past like really the top 2. Like a lot of people have the same third, but there are a lot of people that have a different third. But like there's a guy who could be 6th on one really smart person's rank who is legitimately like 24th on another really smart person's rank who I like rely on them year in, year out on these prospects. And they're usually like not in exact agreement, but like usually they're kind of on the same page, like not that far. But that's like that 6 to like in the 20s is what we're looking at for a lot of these running backs here.
Well, and I mean, just as an example, PFF has Dameon Pierce as RB4 in this draft, and ETR, whose rankings we're using, has him as the RB13.
So we're not talking about him. And I think the Athletic has him as the RB6, so kind of right in the middle. And yeah, I've seen him all over the place as well.
Yeah, there's just the evaluation of this draft, and it does feel like a weaker draft for a lot of the offensive prospects. It's been all over the place, and I've tried to find a consensus on which we'll talk to you about here in a bit, but the wide receiver group, I think there have been 3 guys who have been the quote unquote consensus number 1 since February.
At least. I think it actually might be like 4. I think, and one of them we're not even talking about today because he's not in Establish the Run's top 5, and that's Chris Olave, but he's some people's number 1 overall prospect.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, that's just how crazy it is. And I know George Pickens is another guy we're not talking about today who some people have said deserves to be a top 5 guy. That's been a head-scratching and frustrating roller coaster of emotions for me. If anybody wants to dive into the George Pickens profile and tell me if he's good or not good, would be greatly appreciated because I'm out on that one.
All right, so we'll start at running back. Dalton, we'll start with the guy who I think is the most common RB1 among rankers, and that's Breece Hall out of Iowa State. He's not even 21 yet. I'm going to let you go ahead and give your Breece Hall take. I'm going to pull up a little Breece Hall highlight to pull up on the stream to show the people.
Out of every position player in this draft, I think Breece Hall needs to go 101 unless you're in a super flex. Then there's an argument for Malik Willis. But, I mean, this guy has a consistent body of work. As a freshman, he had 1,140 yards, which was 28% of his team's offense. Then, as a sophomore, he had 1,766, which was 35%.
Mhm.
And then his junior year, he had 1,743, which was 37%. And in this class, he's number one in career yards a game, which is 129. He's by far the best prospect in this draft. His offensive shares compared to guys like Jonathan Taylor and Christian McCaffrey aren't as good. They were both at 46 and 45%, but 37% puts him in the top 18 of running backs drafted in the first 5 rounds in the last 4 years. So he definitely has the ability to be a quote unquote generational talent. I know everybody is a generational talent before they're drafted.
It can't be a generational talent if we say it every year. I'm just going to get that out of the way early. A generational talent is a quite literally once in a generation talent, which means like every 15 years, 10 years, something like that.
He definitely could be a generational talent. And he's definitely a guy that you will love on your fantasy team and could be productive for 6 years, and you'll be happy with your pick.
Yeah, and like I said, not even 21 yet, so he'll be 21 when the season starts. I think he's going to be an immediate starter, assuming he doesn't get drafted by a team that for example, he took a visit to the Commanders. Like if the Commanders, some reason, drafted him, yeah, probably not an immediate starter. But most other places, that guy's going to start right away. He's got great burst, great footwork. He's a really good cutter, can operate in small spaces, and you kind of see all of that in this beginning clip here that I'm playing. He's got the vision, got the cut, can make it to the outside. He's not like the quickest 40 guy in the world, but he's got good enough speed, obviously. And I don't know if I'd say he's the most, do you think he's the most complete back? Like between he and Kenneth Walker, which one of those two do you think is the more complete back?
Well, so it's funny because I was looking today, and when it comes to every carry inside the zone, a zone run, gap scheme, outside runs, Kenneth Walker graded better in his 1 year at Michigan State.
Mhm.
But the complete, I mean, it really comes around to receiving.
You can really see the cut right there if you're watching this on the YouTube, by the way.
Yeah.
That last one, I'll play it again.
I just think the issue is Kenneth Walker didn't get the opportunity to catch, and so we don't know if he's going to get that in the NFL. And that probably is why Breece Hall is a consensus, especially among fantasy guys, as the overall number one. But yeah, he probably has the most complete skill set. It's funny. He ran a 4.39 at his pro day, which everybody was amazed by.
Yeah, everybody was running 4.3s at their pro days this year.
I was going to say, when it comes to speed this year, I don't think we could trust a single one of the combine numbers. It was the fastest combine for every single positional group except quarterback this year. So I just think they have a new timer in place. I mean, Jalen Peter, that safety, ran like a 4.29.
But yeah, I think Breece is really good. I think he's the RB1 in this class if I had to choose between the two. I do think, and we'll get to Kenneth Walker in a minute, I think it's really close, though. I think you could make the argument for Walker. I think he's actually the more complete rusher right now. And it's funny, Breece, I would say one of the things that people will nitpick about him is his pass catching. But if you look up Breece Hall highlights on Twitter, he's got a one-handed catch and a couple of the others come off of catches. So he can catch the ball. And I think he will catch the ball in the NFL. He's just inconsistent at that right now. Some of the technique stuff, and he'll need to get better at that. And he's just not as fast as Kenneth Walker, just like a straight 40. I don't think either. At least maybe not straight 40. I don't know what their actual 40 times are. But although Walker's a 4.38, so I have to imagine that's a tad faster. But just on the field, I think Walker has more of that big play, but Breece does a lot more. He's a more powerful back. He's bigger. More of a specimen. I think Brees Hall is a really good player, and I'm with you that if you're not in a super flex, and maybe even if you are, I think this is the favorite to go number 1 overall in all rookie drafts, unless the landing spot is a disaster like the Commanders.
Yeah. And the last thing, when it comes just to Walker and Hall, I probably feel a little more confident about Hall because Walker didn't play very well at Wake Forest. And I mean,
I'm not so sure. I'm not sure I'd say that.
he didn't play. Okay. He didn't play at the level he played at Michigan State.
Yes. And he wasn't Brees Hall level from, like, if you look at their 2020s, he played 7 games. But also, here's what I'll say that we as KU football fans should be aware of when you're looking at players on bad teams. Like Khalil Herbert, not so good at KU, partially because the coaches giving Puka Williams the ball a lot, which he should have got the ball a lot, but also like his team was garbage. So you've got to kind of take that into account as well, I think, with Kenneth Walker.
Yeah, but it's not like Iowa State was a gleaming program of success for the
but they're better. They're better than Wake Forest.
Absolutely, yeah.
Wow, I just saw the tweet about Lawrence Arnold transferring. Now I'm sad. And
yes,
I feel like he kind of fits the mold of once he chances his way, he could be pretty good. And now I'm sad he's gone.
I think Lawrence Arnold was a true freshman. So maybe on our 2024 draft class dynasty show, we'll get a Lawrence Arnold mentioned late.
I'll tank for him.
Kwame Lassiter, last pick of your fantasy drafts might not be a bad call.
Yeah, could be a good slot guy.
Yeah. All right, Dalton. So Kenneth Walker. We noticed this actually when we were looking at the ages of all these guys. He's going to be 22 when the season starts. He's 21 right now. These top guys are about the only quote unquote young prospects, basically until you get to guys who may not even be drafted in this class. So Walker is still pretty young. He'll be 22 when the season starts. 1,600 rushing yards last season, only 19 receptions his entire college career. 13 of those came last year for 89 yards. With him, I would caution. I'm not saying like I know for a fact he's a great pass catcher, but I wouldn't like count him out just because he had 13 receptions at Michigan State, because a lot of times in college, guys just don't catch the ball because they don't get targeted as running backs. That's just not how their offense works. And college offenses are very much a systematic thing a lot of the time. So it's unproven, I guess I would say, for Walker right now. Don't know for sure that he can or cannot catch the ball, but he hasn't proven it yet, obviously. It's funny with him, he is a physical specimen in his own right, but he's just much more compact than Brees Hall. He's 5'9". He's like a Doug Martin type of build, like a Josh Jacobs-y type of build, at least, just like little bowling ball type of guy. He is probably the most explosive, like lateral agility guy in this draft of any of the running backs. He's got the long speed, but like where he really is set apart as a rusher, and he is the best pure rusher right now in this class, is his vision and just his ability and his vision, his instincts as a runner, and his ability to make guys miss with cuts. I think Kenneth Walker is really good. I think Brees Hall probably has more upside, but like, boy, I'm feeling pretty good about Kenneth Walker as a top 3 pick in dynasty drafts, I think.
Yeah, I like him a lot. 37% of the offense ran through Brees Hall. 42% of Michigan State's ran through Kenneth Walker. So in his one season as a true alpha, he really did run a lot closer to those guys like Jonathan Taylor and Christian McCaffrey. And I mean, the receiving thing, I'm not going to give him a big knock on. They have a scat back in Michigan State in Hayward, who kind of came in on those situational downs and played that role. Obviously, you want him to land somewhere where the coaching staff's going to give him that. And I wouldn't give him a lock on that if there's a scat back in the receiving room. But if he goes somewhere like Houston, I would be pretty excited because, I mean, they don't have anybody on the market to take those away from him.
Yeah.
The thing with Kenneth Walker is, like you said, he's definitely the better running back with vision. Brees Hall is probably more elusive in the secondary, but Kenneth Walker, he just hits hard, and he has that prototypical NFL size where he's small to the ground and kind of runs with a low center of gravity, and that's exactly what you want. He's also, and I think this is unlike Brees Hall, probably a better gimme for getting the red zone work and getting you those touchdowns, which we all know we care about in fantasy, because he's just a little bit bigger and a little bit more of a bruiser.
You can see in this tweet here, 4.46 yards after contact per attempt, which was fourth. I don't know if that's fourth in the country. I'm gonna assume that probably is because that's pretty gaudy, quite frankly. And you can see it in the clip why. I mean, he's tough to bring down. He makes a couple guys miss, and even after the guys make initial contact, he gets a couple more yards on this play. So yeah, I'm a pretty big Kenneth Walker fan. To be frank, I think he is probably, I would say he is the safer bet than Breece Hall, is what I would say. I would say Breece Hall has more upside. I would say Kenneth Walker is the safer bet to be a good NFL player.
Yeah, my concern comes with draft capital and exactly how far they let Walker fall into the second.
But I think it's either going to be late first or second for Breece, and I think it's going to be second for Kenneth Walker. I don't think that's like that big of a difference.
I do too, but it's the NFL draft, and when you get to that second round, I mean, who knows? Some of these guys could have someone that we might talk about later, like Rachaad White, higher on their boards than Kenneth Walker. I'd be surprised, but the Raiders do have a second round pick. Mm-hmm.
So the one thing I did want to mention with Kenneth Walker, and this is not to like try and scare anybody off of him by any means, but just giving you the whole background here, the whole picture. It hasn't been an issue for a long time, but he did have basically the Trey Smith thing in high school, but to a even more heightened degree. Trey Smith, the Chiefs rookie offensive lineman they got in the 6th round. So he basically was told his high school career, or his football career was done, like point blank period. Had blood clots in his lungs and was told his career was done. Took blood thinners, took a shot a day for 3 months and was cleared. Only missed 3 games as a senior. And clearly, like, hasn't been a concern since as far as like holding him out. And I've also, like, when I was a sports reporter back then, I did a story on an athlete that had this exact same thing, that missed a year of college and came back and had their best season of their career as a senior. So, like, obviously he's been fine since then. It hasn't been an issue, but like, just something to, I guess, be aware of if you're thinking about Kenneth Walker.
Yeah, and again, I'm sure the NFL is going to do their medicals at the combine on him and probably got that out of the way. And if he does see a fall, that might be the reason he sees a fall in the draft, I would assume.
That would be, if that were an issue, that'd be about the only thing I could think of. Maybe the Chiefs will get him in the 6th round if people are actually concerned about it at some point.
Yeah, don't make me parse the Chiefs backfield in fantasy if we draft someone like that.
Okay, Rachaad White. Speaking of guys, boy, I did not think we were going to be talking about Rachaad White on this podcast when I was like, okay, let me go look at the established run ranks and pull a list of guys here. But he's their RB3. I'm going to be point blank. He would not be in my top 5 running backs if I were doing rankings. I have pick 8 in our rookie draft. I'm not even considering Rachaad White at pick 8. I think he's probably one of the most purely on field, one of the most controversial prospects of this entire draft, because people seem to either really love him or really hate him. He's not a super polished guy as far as a runner. He's got a lot of holes in his game as a runner. But he also is a pretty darn good route runner, and he's got like the athletic tools that just pass the eye test when you watch him. He's also going to be 24 right after the regular season ends. He's 23, going to be 24 like the week after, like the last week of the regular season. So he's not as young as these first 2 guys. His best chance for an early impact, in my mind, is as a receiver. It's not as a running back. He's got good agility, good acceleration, can make plays after the catch. They actually at Arizona State lined him up in the slot like pretty frequently, and he made plays out of that often. He's got probably the best route tree of any back in this class. So you can at least, like, if you're a Rachaad White fan, what you hope for is like, hey, this guy has the physical tools that if he develops as a runner, the pass catching stuff is already there. Now, what is not there based on Mr. Matt Waldman is the pass blocking. And to get on the field and actually be in the backfield as a 3rd down guy, you kind of have to do that in the NFL. So it's really, kind of a catch-22. What are the coaches gonna put him on the field as a 3rd down back if he can't block worth of crap, which he does not seem to be able to right now. So there's a lot of variables with Rachaad White.
Yeah, I mean, like you said, with Rachaad White, I'm not a huge fan of him because he's not a polished runner. I think he's crept up a lot of people's boards because he has that ability to catch the ball in the backfield. And when I say people's boards, I mean fantasy. I don't think he's probably like a 5th round pick from what I'm looking at on a lot of draft boards.
I think I have the Athletics ranks pulled up right now. Let me look. Rashad White. So they have him as their RB12 and as a 5th round pick, just to give you an idea of the difference between just established the run and the Athletics ranks here.
Yeah. And I'm going to go ahead and give a little defense of Rashad White so we don't just give the negative here.
Well, I gave the pass catch.
You did.
Stuff.
You
That's
did.
clear positive.
Well, that really is the singular positive. But he had 16% of the team's targets last year for Arizona State. He was a JUCO transfer, and it's funny because while I was writing this, I was like, what other good pass catching JUCO transfers do I know about? And I mean, he could be Alvin Kamara because that happened.
Well,
or
but
he could be Ty Montgomery.
Well, here's the thing. He's not just a JUCO transfer. This is like the latest of late bloomers. 0 D1 offers out of high school, went D2 to Nebraska Kearney and redshirted. He redshirted at a D2 school, transferred to a JUCO called Mount Santonio Community College, which is not in San Antonio. It's in California. Had never heard of that JUCO before in my entire life. Committed to UCLA. UCLA basically backed out of it and was like, no, we actually have other guys we'd rather bring in than you. So he goes to Arizona State. A pretty limited role in 2020, but he breaks out this year, 1,000 yards rushing, 450 receiving. And so you can take that both ways. You can take that as, well, this guy's 24. It's taken him this long to get to this point. Like, maybe that's all he is. Or this guy has literally worked from no D1 offers and having the red shirt at a D2 school to he's going to get drafted. So I believe in the work. I believe he's going to improve. And you know what? We don't know. It could go either way. It's going to be up to the NFL teams to make that call. But that's the profile we're looking at here.
Yeah, either he's Adam Thielen or every other flame out that tries in the NFL. But the other positive I will give is I went back and looked his community college days, and he was a great kick returner. Or sorry, JUCO day. He was a great kick returner. Had 8 kick return touchdowns in the one season there, and even for the Sun Devils, he played striker, which is a very important position for punt units. So if you draft the guy, you want him to get playing time somehow, some way. Mm-hmm. But I think if you draft him with the expectation that he's going to help your team now, that's not likely. He's going to be one of those frustrating players who's on the NFL roster, but also is never seeing any playing time, like Brandon Bolden for the Patriots.
Well, and the Matt Waldman player comp for him was Kalen Ballage. So Matt Waldman is not a fan of Rashad White. So I mean, if that's the exact type of player you're talking about, like on the roster, doesn't get playing time unless the starter and maybe even another guy is injured.
Yeah. But clearly we're not fans here.
Yeah. I mean, ETR, smart people have him RB3. I see plenty of people that love Rashad White. I was looking to find highlights of him earlier. Didn't find anything I liked. There's just someone that tweeted just a picture of him hurling somebody. I was like, wow, look at this guy's vertical. So he's got fans. Rashad White's got fans for sure.
Yeah. And to be fair, all the ETR blurb says about him is elite receiving threat. So again, that is
which is not wrong compared to this. I think he might be the best, or maybe probably you can make the argument for top 3. There's a couple of guys later that are decent receivers and nothing else.
Yeah, but if you're drafting in your rookie draft, you want an elite receiver, maybe just draft a receiver. I don't know, just a thought.
Yeah, or just trade like a conditional. If you can trade conditional picks in your league, trade like a conditional 3rd for James White.
Yeah, exactly. There we go.
Or pick him up off waivers. That might be where he is too at the moment. Isaiah Spiller. So the RB4 on ETR, I think he's the most common RB3, but like I said, RB3 is where you start to see some parity as far as ranks go. I think the hype on him has gone the other way, has gone from mostly positive to a lot of negativity after not the best combine. I think his detractors would say, well, he's not even the best running back on his team, which it might not be wrong. And that might not be a knock on him. There's a guy on his team who's going to be a stud coming out in 2023. And it's the reason Spiller was not a workhorse in college. He only had 42% of that backfield's carries, which compared to these other guys, he didn't even top 200 carries last year. And these other guys, Breece Hall, and Kenneth Walker in particular, like shattered that. Like we're up in the upper 200s. So he wasn't that type of workhorse. He doesn't have great vision as a runner in gap. Let me get this right. In gap schemes, but in zone schemes, that is his bread and butter. So this is probably the first guy that you really look at and think, okay, his landing spot is really going to determine how I feel about him. If he is in the right spot and the right system, he's got the footwork, he's got the patience. I think he's got like the athletic chops. Like I think he kind of falls victim, not that he's Dalvin Cook, but like it's kind of the Dalvin Cook syndrome where it's like, well, the things he does well, like athletically, don't show up on the combine testing, but he is still a very good athlete, good cutter, good at a lot of things. And I could see him, if he ends up in a great spot for him, having like a Michael Carter kind of rookie season.
Yeah. I used to not like Isaiah Spiller, and when I was kind of researching for this podcast, I came around to the idea of him. His best skills are his patience and his vision, which that really matters for his landing spot. So I think that's going to dramatically alter how I feel about him, because if you watch any of his plays, he's really good at playing behind the line of scrimmage and then finding the right hole, which is obviously why he works good in zone schemes. He's also the youngest back in this class. We said a lot of old guys. He's going to be 21 when the season starts, so he has time to come around. And he was second in the NCAA last year in avoided tackles, which is at 24%. And I mean, if you know me and Evan, we really try to target those guys. Last year it was Stevenson. 2 years ago it was Nick Chubb was another guy, Kareem Hunt.
Well, I think was it broken tackles or missed tackles forced? I don't remember which stat it was, but basically Michael Carter and Javonte Williams were like, like Javonte 1 and Michael Carter was maybe 2 or 3. It was like, and those guys were not like layup, like top 2 or 3 backs in the class last year, but obviously that was a stat that loved both of them. Whichever stat it was, I can't think of it, but loved both of them last year. Yeah,
and I think that's where he's good. I am always skeptical of when a guy's draft position falls because of the combine, because I mean, the combine doesn't test you don't wear pads when you run a 40. You don't wear pads when you do your 3-cone. I mean, DK fell into the second round.
He ran a 4.6 340 for anyone who wants to know like specific numbers on that, which is not great. But again, like I don't know what Dalvin Cook's 40 was, but that was the whole Dalvin Cook thing. And it's like, oh, like actually this guy's just a different kind of athlete. He's not just like a straight line sprinter.
Yeah.
Not like some of these guys, I guess.
Well, he came out and he even did it again in his pro day and he was bad. And I mean, pro days usually, they give you something. But before the all-star behind him came around at A&M, his freshman year, he was 24% of their offense. So he's still, as a first year in college, he was relatively good. He had 103 yards per game over his entire career. I mean, the guy has all of the intangibles. And I mean, if it wasn't for his pro day, he would probably be a lot closer to the consensus. I'm not going to knock him off for that, but I think right now you can get him at a discount in the second round, and landing spot dependent, he's probably a good bet to hit on that, I think, at least compared to some of the other guys going around that range.
It's really funny. I have his combine and his pro day stuff in front of me. His arms are measured a half inch shorter at his pro day than at the combine. And his wingspan is almost a full inch longer at his pro day than the combine. I don't understand how exactly that's possible. Like how, like I know how it's possible. People are fudging the numbers, but it's like, come on, guys, just straight up measurements. We can't even just get consistent measurements on how long this guy's arms are. Like, come on.
Yeah. Well, and what's funny, again, like Evan and I were saying, after the top 2, this gets really weird. Dan Brugler, who's at The Athletic, has Spiller as the 55th overall prospect, and then Daniel Jeremiah has him as the 33rd overall prospect. I mean, he's probably one of the sharpest contrasts between a lot of guys. I don't think a lot of draft analysts love Rachaad White like a lot of fantasy people do, but when it comes to like real draft guys, I think Isaiah Spiller is kind of polarizing.
He is The Athletic's RB3. So even though he's like 55 or whatever you said, he's still the RB3 on Bugler's rankings. Okay. Brian Robinson as the RB4, a little bit of a surprise for me as well when I was looking at these rankings. So this is a guy, talk about an oldie. He was at Alabama for 5 years, was a role player in 2019-20. Before that, he was like firmly buried on the bench. I think when he got there, he was fifth string. And that's not like to say like, man, like this guy couldn't play. He was fifth string. It's like, no, like he was on the team when like Josh Jacobs was the starter. And I think Damian Harris was still there. It's like these guys are all pros, obviously, at Alabama that were in front of him. But like kind of a rarity in this day and age. He waits it out, waits his turn, and it pays off in a big way for him this last season. 1,300 yards, 14 touchdowns. He actually had 35 receptions for about 300 yards this last year too. If you're looking for another pro, not a lot of wear and tear on the guy. He basically has 1 year of workhorse work and nothing before that. And also, I guess what I'd say about Robinson is if you're looking for like the thumper of this class, like this is your guy. He's a power back. He can make like a cut or two decent enough, but he's a physical downhill runner. 6'1", 225, plays through contact. He might like be a okay like I think he's going to work his way into an okay fantasy option because he's probably going to be, if he works his way into a starter or a rotational role, like that's probably your goal line back on whatever team he's on. Like if he's paired with Michael Carter on the Jets, you could see exactly how that backfield split could and should work. And
Painfully.
Yes, and that would be a valuable role if the Jets are anything but terrible at some point in Robinson's tenure. So he's not a guy that has really that much upside to me. I think it's pretty clear kind of what he is and what he's going to be, but I think he's going to be a solid player. He's reliable. Just like I said, just a good between the tacklers guy. He's physical, only 2 career fumbles. None of those came in 2021 when he was actually the lead guy either. So I just think this is like a solid second round pick if you're looking for a little bit of running back depth on your team.
Yeah, well, and when I looked at him and I kind of read about Brian Robinson, if this was the NFL 10 years ago, he might be the overall like number 2 prospect behind Walker because he fits that old, we just want to get in third and manageable coach mindset where he's going to get you a good 4 and 5 yards, but he's not explosive enough to have those big runs.
And there's still going to be coaches who want him on the field plenty.
Absolutely.
If he goes to certain places, So
well, that's how Jordan Howard made an NFL career.
Yes.
And I think Robinson's probably a better player than Jordan Howard.
Yes.
But I do think he's going to be the guy you draft and hope that he has a, really strong goal line presence for his team. A James Cook is probably, or James Conner, sorry, I'm on draft mode, is somebody I would probably comp him close to in like his high upside. I'm not discounting him for playing behind these guys for 5 years because Damian Harris, who's a great NFL talent, also sat behind a lot of very good players for several years.
Yeah. If you go to Bama as a true freshman running back, you are most likely going to sit for at least a year. But again, he's like Josh Jacobs, all of these guys. It's just I'd have to pull up the whole Alabama running back tree from the last handful of years. But everyone knows every year there's a Bama running back in the NFL, a new one.
Yeah. Now, if you do get him, just know he's not a guy that's going to get you plays in the secondary. He's not going to make guys miss. He's going to hit them head on. He's going to get another 2 yards and fall forward. That's where he lacks as a prospect, I would say. And maybe he can get better at the second level, but I don't really see that happening. And he definitely can catch the ball though and get you some, easy and cheesy PPR points.
And here's the thing about him. People smarter than me say he is actually, I wouldn't say good. I wouldn't say they say good, but like above average, which for this running back class is like the best. He's one of the best pass blockers in this class. So he's going to be a guy that like remember how Spencer Ware was like weirdly on the field all the time for the Chiefs and third downs? Like he could kind of be that depending on the team he goes to in their running back situation. And it's funny you brought up James Conner. I wrote in my notes like a best case scenario. He kind of reminds me of Chris Carson minus the fumbling issues. Like that's kind of the profile. Like he doesn't have, like he's not ever going to be a star, but like if he hits, like I think he can be a pretty solid contributor.
Yeah, I think that's another good comparison. He's going to do his work on the ground and he's never going to wow anybody who watches him. But sometimes those guys who don't do anything extra special are the ones that catches the coach's attention because they just get the work done.
Mm-hmm. Also, I lied. That was the RB5. I think it's the RB4 because I'm so used to Spiller being the RB3 most places I look. But yeah, that rounds out the running backs. Dalton, any final thoughts on these top 5 backs before we jump into the receivers, which that's going to be difficult to parse those guys.
No, I'm way more excited for the receivers if we're being completely honest. I've done a lot more research into the receivers too, because I think this class has some really interesting prospects compared to, I think the running back gets really flat really quick and they're not as fun to read into.
Me too, as somebody who has the 8th pick in the draft, who's probably not getting any of the top 2 running backs that I would really like at that pick. It's been a lot more receiver centric for me before this podcast as well. And where we can start is, you know what? He's not falling the 8 in our draft. So I'm going to come out and say it. Like, Drake London's been my guy for months. Like, you guys know, even during the college football season, I was like, hey, this is the guy I want on the Chiefs next year. Like, after he'd broken his ankle and was out for the season. 6'3", 219 pounds. Everybody is going to say Mike Evans, which, hand up. That's what I said too. 85 to 90% of Mike Evans is what you hope he can be. He's a basketball player who played a bit in college, extensively on the AAU circuit. His leaping skills, he's a natural high point guy who wins like every contested catch. T. Higgins, I think, is another pretty solid comp for him as far as that goes. Here's a little trivia time for you, Dalton. He's one of only 5 Power 5 players to average 11 catches a game through at least 8 games. He only played 8 games this year, and it was exactly 11 catches a game. Can you name the other one? I'll even give you the conference, and I'll give you the year.
I really want to say Justin Blackmon.
No, but right conference, Big 12, and 2007, which everyone knows was the best year in college football history.
Oh, I don't know the answer to that. I didn't watch enough football in 2007 to give you the answer, but I can't believe Justin Blackmon.
Any guesses? This guy, think about it. This guy's like, when you think of Big 12 college receivers, this guy is like probably the elite of the elite in college, not in NFL, although he was pretty good in the NFL.
Well, Justin Blackmon was the elite of the elite.
Johnny, any guesses?
Is it Dez?
Not Dez. You guys are really zeroed in on Oklahoma State here. Michael Crabtree, 2007.
Oh, my God.
That's right. Yeah.
So, as I mentioned, Drake London's season was cut short due to the injury. 8 games, 88 receptions, 1,084 yards, and 7 touchdowns, which is like, that's a full season for a lot of these other guys we're looking at. He did that in 8 games. The one concern you maybe have is the drops. He had 8 drops his last year. He kind of secures catches away from his body a little bit when he doesn't have to, I think. But also he, whether by his own volition or as maybe we'll talk about his quarterback's volition of being just straight dog water, has to go up for contested catches all the time. You're going to have more drops in those situations than if you're open all the time, like some of these other guys. That's just not really his type. He's got pretty good yards after the catch skills, Dalton, even for a guy that's 6'3", 219. I'm going to pull up this highlight from him if you want to start your Drake London monologue.
Well, and I was going to say that's one of the reasons I have an issue with the Mike Evans comp is he's a better tackle breaker than Mike Evans. Now, he's not a get up and get the ball like Mike Evans is.
I don't know. He's pretty close to a get up and get the ball like Mike Evans.
But he's definitely a tackle breaker after the catch too. Right now, it's funny because we mentioned this earlier. He was one of the guys who had, like, he was the overall consensus one.
Look at this. Receiver. This is what the FBI does not want you to see.
Look, I mean, he's running like a running back right now. He's absurd.
And that's like that's what that's the Treylon Burks thing. But it's like, oh, like if he could do that like a little bit like Treylon Burks, but also he's better at everything else than Treylon Burks, like my God.
Yeah, well, and that's the exciting thing. It's funny that he's falling in draft right now because he refused to run a 40 at his pro day. But he had a 31.8% dominator rating as a 20-year-old at USC in only 8 games. That means he accounted for 32% of his team's offense, and his yards per route run was 2.32, and he had 23% of his plays were explosive on a grading scale. This guy, he really does match everything. The big concern is that I went to Matt Harmon and looked, and on some of the NFL staple routes, he failed to register top 6 yards per route run in this class. But his quarterback play out of everybody except for probably Treylon Burks out of the top 5 was so abysmal that you can kind of understand it. I watched a 3-minute montage of Drake London coming back to the catch multiple times because his balls were underthrown.
There's one specifically where he has a guy beat on a vertical route, and he has to come back to it, and he would have scored a touchdown on a good throw. Instead, he makes the catch, a contested catch, and just gets absolutely lit up. You can see why the guy perhaps broke his ankle at some point during the season. He was taking a lot of hits, and again, it's not like he's not a separator, but I don't think this is like an Alshon Jeffrey where it's like, my God, this guy, good player, but like, man, he's blanketed he can't get open at all. Like, I think he's better than that. I think he'll be able to get open better than like that type of guy, but he's not going to be like the Jameson Williams, Chris Olave, like get open all the time, but he's got the other attributes where he doesn't have to be.
Yeah, well, and there is an Alshon Jeffrey in this draft class, and we'll get to him here in a bit. The other thing, and we're just going to hear about this nonstop, but I can't wait for every Sunday to hear Drake London play basketball when he catches a red zone target and scores a touchdown.
Yes.
But I'm pretty happy. I hope he lands in an environment with a good quarterback. And obviously you said that about every wide receiver, but him especially, because these guys who go up and catch contested 50-50 balls need a guy like Aaron Rodgers, Patrick Mahomes, or Russell Wilson to really elevate their value, as opposed to somebody like Jameson Williams, who you just watch him streak down the field. And it's a lot easier for their quarterback to recognize that they're open.
But I will say the difference between him and like a Kenny Galladay is that he was in the slot his first couple of years and then moved outside this last year. Like, he kind of played all over the place. And I think like even on that bubble screen that I showed where he broke some tackles, like he can do some more of that stuff, I think, than people might realize when they just hear Mike Evans when you talk about London. I think he's going to be a starter wherever he goes. I think he is the safest bet of any prospect in this entire class to be good. That's my take.
I have a different prospect, but we won't get to that prospect. My prospect, Chris Olave, is a guy that I think is the most sure thing.
He's right up there too, for sure.
Yeah, but unfortunately, he's not on this list. But we can move on to a guy who I have some fun facts about. He's Treylon Burks out of Arkansas.
Yep.
Massive man. He's 6'3", 225. But the reason why you need to draft Treylon Burks is he hunts hogs with a knife and his dogs. He doesn't use a gun. So if you think this man is scared of NFL DBs, he's absolutely going to tear it up from that perspective. But in all reality, I think that this guy's probably the biggest project in going in the first round right now.
Mm-hmm.
His comps are Deebo Samuel, Laviska Shenault, and Alshon Jeffrey. In my mind, those are like his three potential outcomes. And what got him the hype, and he was a consensus overall one like 3 weeks ago, was that he can break tackles, but you don't want that in a wide receiver like you do a running back. You want a guy who can do things with their hands and catch the ball effectively. And career-wise, all of his targets have come within the 10 yards, except for 18% came past 10 yards. It's just not very exciting for me. He's going to definitely be a project when it comes to his positioning, where he places his feet, and his contested catch radius, in my opinion.
Yeah, 45 of his 66 catches in college came within 10 yards of the line of scrimmage. And then the ones that didn't, they weren't really the intermediate like crossers and stuff over the middle of the field. It was this. He's also really good at the vertical stuff. He can go up and get it, and he can win the deep routes. And then this is him obviously on the bubble screen. Like, that's where he's at his best, when they just get him the ball and let him go. Like, you're going to hear people say AJ Brown with this guy, and like when they see these plays, and that's why. But he's not as complete of a receiver as AJ Brown. Like, point blank, he can get knocked off his routes pretty easy. He's not a very good route runner right now. They used a lot of pre-snap motion or like plays like that, just little bubble screens, tunnel screens, to basically avoid having him face any press coverage this last year at Arkansas. I think he's probably dynamic enough with the ball in his hands and as a vertical guy that to make teams interested in him, like in the first round. I think he's going to be a first round pick, but I think there's a lot more that has to go right outside of his control unless he gets a lot better in other areas, because everyone's going to want him to be the next Deebo Samuel, but like we didn't have a Deebo Samuel until this year. It's not exactly an easy thing to have a receiver who's also your running back, essentially.
Well, before that, it was Cordell Patterson, who it took him 10 years to get to that in the NFL.
Yeah.
I mean, maybe like Percy Harvin is another guy you might be able to go back and compare him to even, but it's just he really needs to land with a coach who can utilize his skills effectively. And we saw what happens when that doesn't happen with Laviska Shenault, where he's being used improperly with his good routes. I mean, Treylon Burks is like the prototypical big slot guy, and that is where he needs to land on a team. And I am always scared when someone compares there's only one Deebo Samuel in the NFL, then says this is the next Deebo Samuel. There's only one in the NFL for a reason. And as we've talked about on this podcast, Deebo also gets a lot of rushes out of the backfield, which I don't think many teams are going to give Burks straight out of the gate.
Yeah. Although he definitely like has the size. Did you read off his height and weight, Dalton?
He's 6'3", 225.
Yes.
I will say a lot of the scouts I read says he could probably be a little slimmer. I think they're calling him fat. I don't know for sure.
I think Brett Coleman actually pretty much came out and said he's straight up out of shape at a lot of his pre-draft stuff. So that's also a concern too, that he showed up to, probably the most important workouts of his life so far, not in shape. And he didn't have like it wasn't like a Justin Ross or even like a George Pickens, but more like Ross. Like it wasn't a situation like that where it's like, oh, this guy has been hurt for the last 3 months and been nursing an injury and is like just barely back to running. Like, no, he hasn't had he didn't have surgery, anything that he's just coming back from. He just wasn't in shape.
Yeah. And my biggest concern with Treylon Burks, and I'll say this now, is that he goes to Green Bay, which you would think would be a great thing for any receiver. But this guy does not run his routes correctly with probably the touchiest quarterback when it comes to his guys running routes correctly, that I would be incredibly concerned as a fantasy owner for that to play out. I mean, it took Devontae Adams like 3 years to get Rodgers' trust, and he's a much more polished route runner. Maybe he wasn't coming into the NFL, but I think that's Treylon Burks' biggest weakness in his game right now. And him going to a team that historically will bury you on the depth chart if you don't have the rapport with their quarterback just worries me a lot.
What worries me with him isn't even necessarily, well, he worries me, but what I'm worried about is what are the two most common destinations you've seen for him in mock drafts? Because the two that I've seen are the Chargers and the Cowboys.
I've seen the Eagles and the Cowboys, and it feels like the Eagles are just getting Jalen Reagor 2.0 with him.
Well, and with the Cowboys, it's like, well, okay, this is a slot guy. What do I want CeeDee Lamb to do? I want him to run from everywhere. I would not like Treylon Burks there, taking up the slot time that I want CeeDee Lamb to get. But it's Jerry Jones. It's Arkansas. It's a first-round pick. That seems like that's at least a decent chance of happening. We're going to do props next week. I wonder what the prop is for Burks just straight up to the Cowboys. That might be on the list. And then with the Chargers, it's like, well, they already have Keenan Allen, like one of the best slot guys in the NFL. They have Mike Williams like on the outside, so it's not like they don't have an outside guy, but
and Josh Palmer.
And Josh Palmer, sure. So there's enough overlap there where it's just like, I don't know. And even like you look further down, like the Chiefs, like, well, the Chiefs have Juju, and Juju is just like a more polished, better version of Burks right now. Burks might have more upside than Juju at this point, but I don't see that fit either. So a fit is going to be a real big, like he's got to go to a team that he can have free reign of the slot, basically. It's kind of like Kadarius Toney last year, where he did not go to a good spot, where it's like he needs to go to a spot where the coach is like innovative and willing to take chances and try new things with play calls and stuff. And that's not what happened with Toney last year. And it was really cool for like 2 games and really bad otherwise.
Yeah. Well, it always worries me when like you ask someone what this guy's best trait is compared to the class, and they say broken tackles. And a wide receiver, I mean, you don't break tackles at wide receiver. You catch the ball when you're open. After the catch, he might break a few, but for the most part, I don't like that being his top trait. I prefer that for a guy who has to take contact like a running back, not a guy who should be open when he catches the ball and run out of bounds.
The last thing on Burks is his trajectory to me has just been so interesting, because if you followed dynasty stuff during the season, people looking at prospects for this draft, like Burks was like the 1.01 or at worst 1.02. And I still feel like he's pretty high on he's more highly thought of by people who are just thinking from a dynasty perspective than real life NFL draft perspective. I'm just very curious to see how that all works out in the end.
Yeah, well, and Burks has the best quote dominator rating of this wide receiver class, and I think people are overweighting that and not looking at how he got those touches and those yards, and then expecting it to one-to-one translate. Laviska Shenault was also the best dominator rating in his class, and I still love him, but I've also lost a lot of money on DraftKings to the guys. I mean, it goes both ways.
All right, another guy who has pretty consistently been one of the 3 or 4 guys I've seen as the top receiver. And I don't think I've seen him any lower than like 3 or 4. He's been one that's been pretty firm in the top 3. It's not been like I have not seen hard. I don't have you seen anyone have Garrett Wilson outside the top 5?
No, I've seen him going first to the Falcons in a lot of mocks.
Yeah,
too.
yeah. So Garrett Wilson, 70 receptions, a little over 1,050 yards, and 12 touchdowns last year. He's 5'11", 183. I don't know if you ever look at the Ringers draft guides. I do sometimes just because the player comps are funny because they'll take they do this thing where it's like shades of, and they'll like combine 2 things. And his was Odell Beckham on Red Bull.
Oh my God, that's a good one.
He has elite body control and ball skills, explosive release, his short area burst to create separation in tight spaces, sets up his cuts well, like all that. Yeah, that does sound like Odell Beckham a little bit for sure. A 62% win rate in contested catch situations. He's physical with the ball in the air. He was a slot guy in 2020, outside in 2021, so he's done both, but he's undersized. He probably could be more consistent in his route running. And a little bit like Odell at times, it's like, how is this guy who can make these great catches? If you remember, if you just look up Garrett Wilson, remember back to his freshman year, he made like the catch of the year against Clemson in the national championship game. But that same guy will have like frustrating drops that you're just like, how is this guy capable of both of these things? But that's kind of the Garrett Wilson experience.
Yeah, and out of everybody in the draft, I think he ranks as the most well-rounded. He's great, but not amazing at any one thing. I think the one area that he probably almost wins out on is his speed, but Jameson Williams is still faster. Unfortunately, we don't have that comp because he didn't run at the combine for obvious reasons.
I would say where he wins is his like suddenness and things of that nature as a route runner. And that is why I brought this play. Like, okay, we're on the 1 yard line. It should not be easy to get separation like this on the 1 yard line. Like that's just dumb how stupid he just made that quarterback look.
Well, it is the scum of the Big Ten of Maryland. Speaking of Maryland,
it's still Big Ten.
I think his best comp is Stephon Diggs. Like we've mentioned, it's his route running that's really done him well. And he did win on both levels in college. He won inside, he won outside.
Mm-hmm.
And in this class, he ranks second in explosive target rate, which means he's most likely to kind of not house them, but take a catch for 10 plus yards, which is really good considering Treylon Burks and Drake London were both in that same area. I out of all of them, except for Treylon Burks, obviously I don't like him. Garrett Wilson's the one that I just feel like he's going to have a really good NFL career, but he's never going to have the great games. And I just can't get myself excited for him as much as some of the other guys in this draft. At least among the top 4, just take out Treylon Burks and add Olave in that. He's the one that kind of least gets me excited. And I'm also just worried that if he ends up somewhere like Atlanta, he's going to be in a QB purgatory for a while.
So the like best case scenario that I've seen others say for him is CeeDee Lamb. And he does have that kind of that burst like I just showed there. And in those short areas, he's really sudden, can make guys miss. What he kind of strikes me as the type of guy where he all of a sudden in the NFL isn't going to be able to quite do the things he could in college, make guys miss the way he could, and he might struggle to adjust. And like what I mean by that is like he doesn't always make like the best decisions in the open field, but it doesn't really matter in college because he's so much better. And like he does have the ability of CeeDee Lamb to make guys miss, get yards after the catch, things like that, and just be crazy hard to tackle because he's so elusive. But he could also like lose 5 yards because he runs backwards, and he kind of has a little bit of that, a little bit of DeMarcus Robinson.
Oh
him.
God, maybe that's why I don't like him.
Not that bad, but I think that's just kind of my vibe when I read others talk about him and watch a little bit of his highlights, not just the good plays, but just highlights of him myself. Is that he kind of seems like the guy that when he jumps up a level, it might be a little bit of an adjustment period. Like he can't make all of the same plays because he's not by far the best athlete on the field anymore.
Yeah, well, I know Matt Harmon at Reception Perception also said out of his top 8 guys he evaluated in this class, Garrett Wilson struggled the most in press coverages, which is kind of a concerning thing because the DBs in the NFL are going to be much more aggressive in their press coverages. So you hope he can work on that in his game.
Mm-hmm. I agree. And you mentioned Olave. I think he makes the flashier plays. Eli, I'm just not looking at the chat. Eli says he knew it was Michael Crabtree on the trivia question. Shout out, Eli.
Yeah, see if he does it live.
It's a little bit different being put on the spot, I will say. But yeah, I think he makes the flashier plays than Olave. But if I had to bet on one, Olave is the safer bet of the two, certainly. And both of them a little undersized.
Yeah, it's funny. Me and Evan were both excited not to mention Olave, so no one knew we loved him, and he's come up in this podcast like 12 times.
Well, I like him, but he's not my favorite. He might not even be my second favorite. Might not even be my third favorite. I don't know, but he's definitely like in my top 5 receivers if I had the rank.
Yeah, definitely. Now, speaking of receivers, I would love to rank and my overall number 1 guy in this class.
Speaking of receivers, I can't even beat out Chris Olave and Garrett Wilson. Let's go to Jameson Williams.
What a horrible narrative. God forbid a guy transfers and does well and gets punished for it. First of all, just extraordinary. In his career at Alabama, which was 1 year, Jameson Williams had 94 catches and 18 touchdowns, which is an absurd touchdown rate. Then he had 2 kick returns as a special teamer. Those 2 things really stand out to me because
he set the Alabama single season record and led the FBS with 4 touchdowns of 70 or more yards last season, to give you an idea of what kind of explosive player we're talking about here.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely the most explosive player in this class. Against the best defense in the nation, Georgia, he went 784 and 2 touchdowns. And he is by far the best separator out of everybody in this draft class. And I think if he hadn't torn his ACL, he would have been a lot closer, if not the consensus 1 amongst guys. And he's still creeping up with that. And he's not going to play until November.
I think he'd be top 2 for sure.
Yeah, it would be him in London, I would think.
So here you're talking about separator. This is against Georgia. Goodbye. Double move. Touchdown.
I mean,
pretty good. I mean, people threw out the Deshaun Jackson comp. He's not Tyreek Hill and he's not Jalen Waddle, but like if there were a Jalen Waddle type in this class, it would be Jameson Williams. The difference, and I was reading Seth Kaiser, a Chiefs guy, do a scouting report on Jameson Williams today. The biggest difference, just talking about their speed, is that Jameson Williams, the one negative, he's not as good of a stop and go like accelerator, like out of his break type of guy as you would think. Like still really good, but like we've talked about this before. Like when we talk about Tyreek Hill compared to other fast guys, like that's the difference. So like, yeah, he's not quite that type. So he's not quite the 0.1%, but he's the 1% as far as speed and those attributes go.
Yeah. And I think he's not just a straight line runner too. A lot of his highlights, he's taken slants, 50 yards.
He can flip the field horizontally and vertically, which is a nice skill to have.
Absolutely. And the NFL is starting to catch on that you want explosive passing plays. And I think out of everybody except for maybe Burks, but we've talked about our issues with him, he's the most explosive guy in this class.
Mm-hmm. I think he is the most explosive guy in this class, even more so than Burks.
Yeah. And even if somehow, some way he comes to the NFL and he's not an immediate starter in November when he's healthy, he is an immediate kick returner and punt returner. And that's usually those guys work their way onto the starting lineup 9 times out of 10. I think he's going to be an immediate producer. What sucks is he's probably going to take some high draft capital to get, and you're not going to get anything out of him this year.
Yeah, what I was going to say is it's a really tough pill to swallow if you were bad last year and you want and if he goes to the Chiefs or the Packers or I don't know, the Chargers, someplace where it's like, yeah, he's going to be a top 4 pick in rookie drafts.
Mhm.
That's a real tough pill to swallow unless you trade up for a pick like you did with a good team. If you're a bad team, you're not going to have that guy until October, November. And how many examples have we seen of a guy just not quite the same the first year back, and the second year back from the ACL is where he really looks more like himself again. I'm not saying that's what's going to happen, but when people say it's going to be a redshirt year for him, that's the precedent that they're working with. And we have the Dalvin Cook year where he did that. I'll be interested to see some of the ACL, like Chris Godwin coming back because they tore their ACLs about the exact same time. Actually, that thing with Williams is he didn't tear it during the college football season. It was in the title game, so it was basically during the NFL playoffs, right before the NFL playoffs. So he's not looking at. He's not going to be there for any preseason stuff going full speed. I wouldn't think. So
Yeah.
if you're taking a real long-term look and you think the 2023 draft is going to be really good, which a lot of people do, but that's a little bit dangerous to do. Look ahead at drafts and project how good you think they're going to be. But if you do think that, you'd be like, hey, I'm going to take this guy. He's not going to play half the year. He's not going to contribute that much after that, possibly. And I'm going to suck again, and then I'm going to get good really quick. I could see someone who's patient taking that outlook with their team, because I do think he's one of my favorite prospects for sure, for all the reasons that you mentioned. He can flip the field horizontally and vertically. He's not just a burner, can actually run routes pretty well. He tracks the ball well on deep stuff. But he's a smaller guy. He's had some issues with focus drops in his career. And even if he comes back at only 85 to 90% of what he was instead of 100% of what he was, not just next year, but period, that's where the downside actually does exist, because he doesn't have, if you take away the burst, he doesn't have the size to back that up necessarily. So there is, I think he may be the biggest risk reward guy of anybody we've talked about today. I think
Might be Burks, but I'd say the downside on Burks is
I think the upside here for me is higher, but that's because I'm not a fan of Burks. But I could see why others who are fans of Burks would say that.
What I will say, I know everybody thinks an ACL surgery is cut and dry, but I don't know if anybody read the report about Odell Beckham's first ACL surgery actually kind of set him back as an athlete, and they think that the second one he had is setting him forward. What I will say is that Jameson Williams is still climbing draft boards after the combine, which means his medicals did clear. I'm assuming a lot of teams took a look at the ACL, and from what I've read, I'm not a doctor. Surprise, I know. From what I've read, this is enough time for them to get a clear look at whether or not that knee is structurally going to be fine. And it looks like just because he's flying up the boards again, that I think he's going to come away from it okay, which is what you need and want, because he's so explosive. He needs that ACL. God forbid he doesn't have an ACL.
Yeah, that'd not be great. Not be great for him not to have the ACL. All right, Dalton, our last guy here. Again, a little bit of a surprise to me that he was 5th. I know there are a lot of real NFL draft people who are big fans of Sky Moore, though. Sky Moore, 5'9", $195. So again, another undersized guy. He's a guy that I think a lot of people just project him as a slot guy. He's a balanced route runner. He can do the stutter step thing to beat guys on the inside. He can beat press coverage some that way. I actually think he might need to, because he's not the athlete that Williams is. I think he's going to have to develop more ways than that to beat press coverage, to really be a difference maker. But this is a guy who produced big time in college. Almost 100 catches, 1,300 yards, and 10 touchdowns at, I believe, Western Michigan. Yeah, Western Michigan last season. Here's the kind of weird thing about Sky Moore. Do you know he has the biggest hands of any receiver in this draft class at 5'9", 195?
That is incredibly weird. I did not know that.
He has 10 1/4 inch hands. Second place is Christian Watson at 10 1/8, who Christian Watson's 6'5", 200 and some pounds. This guy is basically my height and has the biggest hands in the draft.
Kenny Pickett is upset at that.
His hands are probably like 2 inches bigger than Kenny Pickett. You could probably put 2 of Donald Trump's hands in Sky Moore's hands.
Oh my God. This, first of all, so surprised, Establish the Run, which is a organization I respect a ton, has him in the top 5. First, I loved Sky Moore 2 months ago. And then since February, he's jumped 51%, 57 spots in mock drafts, not rookie drafts for fantasy, in real mock drafts. He's absolutely skyrocketed. He had a 28% dominator rating and a 22.92 yards per route run. So he does have some exciting things. I just think he's really tiny and doesn't have like a high level production. He went 2 for 22 against Michigan, which is really the only team he played. And I'm not trying to harp on one game, but and he got outproduced by a guy who's in the NFL now, who's not very good, in D. Eskridge. They played together last year. And in their 5 games together, Moore had 388 yards and 3 touchdowns, and Eskridge had 556 yards and 5 touchdowns. I don't really know if there's a lot there other than that this is a good scheme like we saw last year with Eskridge, where he fit in so well that he just looked good on tape, but in reality, he's just not that good.
Well, here we go. You can see a guy who can win on multiple levels. Here's like the stutter step stuff I was talking about. Just leaves the guy in the dust on the press coverage. And that's playing Pittsburgh, so that's not like playing a terrible team by any means. And he's actually, I think he's a pretty good deep ball tracker. That's everything I'll say about him. That's obviously wide open. But I do think he has some upside as a vertical threat guy if he can, has the burners to actually get by people.
I will say, and they're showing a lot of highlights in this clip for those not watching from the Western Michigan, Northern Illinois game. When I was looking at this guy in February, watch the entire game because he goes off.
Yeah,
and
he murdered
insane. No, he's definitely an exciting prospect. I just don't think he's worth the top 5 pick in fantasy drafts right now, which I was looking at him like in the late second, early third initially. And it just seems like he's really starting to command a bigger and bigger investment. And I just think he's a little more raw than some of the guys underneath him.
I think the question with him is two questions, whether or not he can actually, what is there anything there that leads you to believe he can be anything more than a slot guy? I think the people that love him say yes, that he can win on all 3 levels. He's a good deep ball tracker, yada, yada. I think the people that say no are going to look at in college, 85% of his targets came within 20 yards of the line of scrimmage. And then the NFL, he's obviously undersized. One thing he does have going for him, I mentioned the huge hands. Like if you're not getting open, not getting open by like a ton, biggest hands in the draft can reach up and snatch the ball like kind of like quickly in those quick windows. He's got a wider catch radius for a guy his size and his wingspan. Like his wingspan is John Mechie actually has a really short wingspan. His wingspan is basically the same as, oh my God. Wendell Robinson's wingspan is 67 and 5/8 inches. He's the only guy below 70. He is a tiny individual.
Very tiny. But
he's the only guy below 70 on the top 20 of the Athletic.
But Robinson also is one of only 7 wide receivers to have 1,300 yards in SEC history in the last 2 years.
I know, but my God, that just like I was looking at wingspan like comps, like John Mechie is the closest for Sky Moore, 67 and 3.
And Mechie's another guy that's probably going to end up in the slot. So
yes,
it's funny, and I was going to say this at the top, but when I'm researching this draft, the number of players people say he'll be great if he ends up in the slot is too damn high. Because even Drake London and Treylon Burks, people are like, big slot guy, huge slot guy. I'd love to see him in the slot. It's like,
yeah, see, I think London actually, like, he can play slot, but I think he can be your X if you.
Me too. It's just, it's funny how many guys. I think that's just the easiest wide receiver position to pronounce instead of the X or Y, where you have to explain what those are, or flanker. That everybody just says slots what they want to be.
Yeah, so I think with Moore, since I think he is going to be a slot guy, I think it's really going to depend on where he lands. Like, if he lands on a team that uses their slot guy frequently, like, okay, if he's getting good volume and he's like actually getting playing time, like, yeah, I could totally see him having a productive couple of years. But if he lands somewhere where the team just they don't really look at the slot guy as much as a lot of others, then I think he's going to be a big time volume play because I don't think he's got like that. I don't think he's like an elite talent that's going to just command volume because he exists on a team like some of these other guys above him could be. Like, would I pick him in the first round? No. If he's there in the second round and I'm looking for some solid receiver depth and a guy that I can picture as my wide receiver 3 in like 2 years, like a solid 3-4 on my team, then yeah, I'll take that in the second round.
Yeah. And I'm really struggling not to comp him to Cole Beasley and Hunter Renfrow. But those comps fit really well, including the advanced statistics behind the guys, like separation rate, how often they get open, where their targets come from. He fits Hunter Renfrow's profile really well, and they're also undersized. I don't think he's as good of a route runner as Renfrow, but that's kind of the upside you're shooting for, where it takes some things to fall their way for them to have like a top 20 season.
Mm-hmm. For sure. Last thing before we get out of here, if you're just looking and deciding between running back and receiver, even after like the top couple of guys, like if you're in the mid first round, and obviously later on it's different because there's some older guys, but none of the guys we talked about today are even 22 years old yet. I guess Burks is barely 22. All the others are still under 22, and a lot of those top guys are like 21, 20. London's not even 21 yet. So just something to keep in mind. Running backs have a shorter shelf life in real football and obviously in Dynasty anyway. And so if you're looking for a tiebreaker, can't decide between positions, not a bad idea to take a receiver who's 21 over a running back who's 23, like later in your first round.
Yeah, and I'll also say I think after my top 4 wide receivers, this wide receiver class gets pretty flat for a while, and same with running backs. But I think the running back class has a lot of guys are in tier 2, like probably 9 or 10. I think the tier 2 for the wide receivers is only probably like 4 or 5.
I think you can get some pretty solid running backs in the third round.
Me
now,
too.
I could be totally wrong on that, but right now, that's what I think.
Yeah, obviously landing spot dependent, yada, yada, yada. But just from a skill standpoint, there are a lot of guys in the running back category that you can get in round 3 that look a lot like second round picks right now.
I agree. And that is going to do it for us today on episode 67 of the Half Point Per Podcast. You can follow us on Twitter, Instagram, TikTok at Half Point Per Pod. Subscribe to the YouTube channel. We will be back next week, like I mentioned earlier, with a quick props show, talking about different bets that we would theoretically make on NFL Draft Night. And then we will be back just like last year on NFL Draft Night live on YouTube. I don't think we're going to start pick 1 this time. I think we've decided maybe like pick 10. We might have like a quarterback and a receiver go by then, maybe just a receiver, maybe nobody. I don't know. But if we have any skill guys go, we'll talk about them right when we get on, and then we'll be there for the rest of the first round as well. But until then, thank you guys so much for listening, and we will talk to you multiple times next week.